Welcome to another episode of Turning the Table, sponsored by Benchmark 60. Turning the Table is the most progressive weekly videocast and podcast for today's food and beverage industry, featuring staff-centric operating solutions for restaurants in the hashtag new hospitality culture. My name is Adam Lamb, and I'm a career coach for chefs and hospitality professionals. This episode is 115. How do you put the pieces back together? This hashtag Lunchbox live stream is broadcast every week on Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Time on the Turning the Table podcast page on LinkedIn. We're also on YouTube and the Chef Life Coach page on Facebook. You can catch the podcast version everywhere you get your podcasts in about 2 days. And you can follow the link at turningthetable.podcast.com/listen, which will open up in your favorite podcast player. We ask that you share the show with someone you care about who can find this information useful and leave a review. And I'd like to welcome my co-host, Jim Taylor of Benchmark 60.
Morning, Adam. How are you?
Jim, how are you, babe?
I'm good.
And I'm glad to hear you finally got some rest, because you've been running the candle at both ends with a new child and running the business and everything. And I thought we would start with some listener mail that we got. And it's pretty potent stuff. So the mail goes like, "Hi, I came across your podcast this morning while looking for some hope in the hospitality industry." First off, it's a really powerful first statement, looking for hope in the hospitality industry. I love the hospitality industry so much. I've been in it about every position in the restaurant business. Your most recent podcast made me feel vindicated after feeling defeated, something I don't feel very often. I stepped into a situation where blank, her direct report, has treated the team so poorly that everyone is ready to quit. I was beginning to think that maybe my expectations were too high. I don't mean of the staff. I mean expectations for upper management to just care a little bit about the employees and about training staff to succeed at their jobs. Mostly, I just really wanted to thank you guys for doing a podcast that speaks so openly about the mental health issues in the restaurant industry and retention of good employees and the importance of good management. Wishing you all the best. So first off, we wanted to say thank you very much. It's kind of a courageous email to send. Because, Jim, I know right before the show we were talking about it, both of us have actually been in this similar situation. And I think that if you've been in the industry long enough, you will run into this situation while you're, either have to clean up a mess that someone has left, or to be kind of wedged in the middle of the situation where you see obviously a deficit in leadership such that the staff has been kind of traumatized. And that person is probably still on staff somewhere. Very often you direct report. So there's a lot of needles to thread in this conversation. So I just wanted to first start by asking you, have you ever been in a situation where you had to walk into an operation that had clearly been mismanaged or misled? And what were a couple of the first things that you did while you were there?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of scenarios and I think we need to address the fact that, sometimes as in management positions, we go into a scenario where, we could either think it's been mismanaged or the team thinks that it's been mismanaged, right? And I think what we're trying to chat about today is those scenarios where the team feels like it's been mismanaged, because everybody's got opinion on how an operation should run, right? So, I think there's a couple of scenarios that I was involved in my operations career where, you start a new position and the team comes forward and just says, this, things need to change, or we need help, or, we're happy there's someone new here, whether you know them or not. And, I think that my approach to trying to work through and navigate those types of situations was always just based on nothing matters more than making sure that the team is comfortable and feels supported and happy coming to work every day. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's, more apparent now than ever. There's places that are already tight for staff, and losing more people, isn't an option. So, I think, I've been in that situation a few times, and it's never easy to work through because it doesn't change overnight. Those wounds don't heal overnight. And I think you mentioned you've been involved in some of that before too.
Yeah. And I guess it's a great point that you're making. How do you make a differentiation between, say, they often say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So there might be a couple team members who you might not necessarily feel familiar with yet that are very often the first ones to kind of like talk out at meetings and say, hey, we really need help. We need this, we need that. And it's hard to differentiate whether or not that's the truth or that's just their opinion. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting to go through that process and trying to differentiate, like you said, between the person who's just vocal and the person who genuinely cares about the rest of the team and change and moving the business forward.
Right.
And I think that this is something that we talk about pretty much every week. You talk about it in your business, I talk about it in my business, and just trying to find ways to do a better job of protecting the employee experience and the career experience in hospitality. Right. And in this case, this is exactly, applaud her for sending through that comment, because she's speaking about the exact same thing, but from her experience.
Yeah. So let's take the listener's position that she's been around the operation enough to know that there's, that people are walking around with their heads down, their shoulders bowed, that there's not a lot of pride in the team, that there's, clearly a lack of, it's not for nothing that we say retention is the new cool, because very often you can look at the statistics and know whether or not someone's been managing an operation well enough. And I've been known to say once or twice that, you can tell a good chef by his leaving, meaning that once he or she leaves and you take stock of where the team is, both emotionally and operationally, you can very often make a very clear distinction about whether or not they were really good at their job or not. Because let's face it, some people are very charismatic and very personally forceful, and they can keep an operation running.
Mm-hmm.
Although probably not to what we would consider to be the best form of, efficiency or productivity. But, once that person is gone and they're out of that situation, then there's nothing kind of holding all those people together other than, I guess in a certain situation would be either fear. But let's say she's pretty clear about what's been going on, and yet that person that was responsible for that is still in the management structure somewhere. How does she even start to have a conversation, first off with her direct report, and not make them wrong for what they did, because that's probably the start of a very short conversation, but to be able to look at the operation holistically and neutrally, such that they can come to some type of consensus about what it would look like to move the team forward in a cohesive manner.
Yeah. We were having this discussion with an operations team the other day about, looking at the business in terms of the feedback that's come forward, the ideas that have come forward, the concerns that have come forward, and actually trying to paint a picture of what would the perfect operation look like, and be really objective about the feedback that they're receiving, and try to, create specific, ideas and things that we can work on every day in order to get to that perfect operation, and remove, I always found that when I was in that mid-level management type position, my job was to filter information, filter, negative feedback, constructive criticism from the upper levels of management that maybe, and not their own fault, sometimes slightly disconnected with exactly what's going on.
Correct.
My job was to filter some of that so that the team didn't feel it. Right. And then, like I said, really work on what does the perfect scenario look like every day, and work with the team on the, in the field, on the ground every day to try to build towards that. Because it's so tricky when the person or the people in the senior levels of leadership have one idea about what's going on, and then sort of gets filtered down, right?
Yeah, I have some pretty specific experience around this that we'll get to in a second with the story. But ultimately, it comes down to, if I'm hearing you correctly, wanting to protect the team. And I also get that the team may not necessarily be aware of those efforts to protect them. And I say this because I always felt that it was important for me to own the company line no matter what it was, because it's way too easy to go into an operation and says, well, the general manager wants to do this, or upper level wants to do that, and always kind of pushing off responsibility about what there is to do off to some unseen or unheard entity
Yeah.
because I wanted to save my ass in front of my associates and not want to look bad.
Hmm.
Yet I also got that that's pretty much a victim conversation because there's no way I can ever influence what's going on. And pretty soon they're going to start looking at me going like, well, dude, if you can't protect us, then what the hell are you here for? Right. So sometimes it means owning that, um, that bad news as a decision that I was involved in.
Hmm.
But I remember clearly plenty of conversations that I had with upper management, HR, um, regional directors about specific staff members that those staff members will never ever know. And nor do I need to go there and hey, look at me, look what I did, because that's to the opposite side of like
Hmm.
making it all about hubris and me. And I've
Yeah.
always wanted to make sure that there was a clear line of rateable performance, like what are the standards and are you living up to those standards or not? And so that meant that I couldn't manage by um, personality, with whether I was winning one for the team or taking one for the team. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think the things that we're talking about right now about protecting the team and about, filtering information or how what types of conversations you're having about the operation or the individuals working in it. This stuff applies to every level of the business. And I know I speak for both of us when I say that we've both experienced all those different levels of management and leadership and, in lots of different environments. So, I mean, myself, I'm fully comfortable saying that this applies to every single level of management, that it's about the team. It's about making sure we deliver messages in as positive a way as possible. That, everything that we go through in the industry, especially right now with the labor shortages, has to be people centric. It has to be people focused, because if it's not, it's only going to get harder.
I um i love the questions that are starting to come up in some posts that I'm reading, people advocating a deeper sense of mentorship as opposed to leadership. And one of the first questions is, how can I what can I do to make your job easier? And I know that that's a tricky question, and I know that some operators don't want to ask that because either they've never had it easy and don't necessarily feel a responsibility to like
Yeah.
make anyone else's life easy. Uh, but I keep coming back to this idea of what it would be like to actually be in the operation by myself, because that's all that's left. And so I think speaking to our listeners, um, quandary, it's like when you go to speak to your direct reports and saying, okay, so what kind of operation do you see that's possible? And I don't want to necessarily have to make a call around to the other departments because I'm short busboys and I need somebody on the floor. And
Mhm.
so painting a picture of what the possibilities are probably lends itself to a bigger conversation about, okay, so if that's what's possible, what do we actually need to get there?
Yeah. What support do we need?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And there's another part to this entire conversation that I'll get to in a minute. Um, but this is one of the reasons why you and I talk so consistently about values and
Mhm.
standards, not necessarily as from an organizational standpoint, but from an individual's standpoint. This person as a hospitality professional.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to be lucky enough to have been able to wrangle Jensen Cummings onto the show, which is always a gas. And the topic of the show is, what do you stand for? So in a lot of my coaching, that's exactly where we need to start, is what do you stand for? What's
Mhm.
important to you? What are those incorruptible values that you have? And then how do you match that with an employer? So now this particular associate is in this position where she probably feels like her hands are tied a little bit. And she stated quite clearly that, she's been coming home and feeling kind of defeated,
Mhm.
which is a feeling that I know very well. And
Yeah.
just say, I'm sorry that you're going through that right now. And there are a couple ways in which you can turn this, not necessarily to your advantage, but your team's advantage. But the only way that that's actually going to work is if you're focused entirely on the team and what you can do to assist them. And it may be as simple as, having more shift meetings,
Mhm.
and saying, listen, times are tough. During COVID, I had several meetings a day with shift personnel, and there was very little information that I could share because none of us knew what the hell was going on.
Mhm.
And yet the job still needed to be done. So I think that like putting yourself out there as a barometer for what's happening in the operation and in the community is important, because where else are they going to get that information? And even if you don't have the answers,
Mhm.
that you ask the questions, because very often what we're finding is that one of the very top reasons that people leave an organization is because of communication or lack thereof. So Jim, what would you suggest as far as like trying to hold this team together for the short term? Like what do those conversations sound like?
Well, in that level, where this individual is at, it seems to me like they're in a mid-level management
Mm-hmm.
type position, right?
Yep.
And one of the hardest things that I always found in that position is the balance between, I'm reporting to somebody, whether I agree with the direction they want to see the business go or not. And then there's all of these people that are relying on me every day to, deliver for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, that only gets harder when, you're in a position like she's describing where she's feeling defeated and that type of thing. And, me personally, the way that I always tried to work through those situations, because they happen and
Mm-hmm.
they come up, was that, to recognize that my wins were the team's wins, right? If an employee had a great day and I had anything to do with that, or I talked them through it, or we worked on something together, or we provided training and or development or mentorship for them, then that was a win for me, and I sort of tried to feed off of that type of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because looking in a scenario like she's talking about, looking upwards for that motivation, it's not happening right now.
Right.
Right. So there needs to be other ways to stay focused and stay centered and stay, with your eye on the prize kind of thing. Right. And I think in that scenario, that's really tricky in that position where you've got, that mid-level type responsibility.
Yeah, I think, and this is not the first time that this type of conversation has come up for us,
Mm.
especially since the show started. And unfortunately, for some folks, when the disconnect is so significant and the polarities are so far apart, then it becomes a time of really thinking about yourself,
Yeah.
your own mental health, your own physical health, your own emotional health. And it may be necessary to seek that type of congruent employment elsewhere. And I
Mhm.
hate to say that because I even spoke to a chef the other night where, I asked him, what does he really like about being there at this particular organization? And his answer was would feel guilty leaving his team.
Mm.
So he never really gave me a positive, but what was present for him was this feeling of like guilt and maybe shame about the fact that he's done the good job, brought this team together. He's had family members bring other family members there to work with him, yet his first emotion was not wanting to leave because he felt guilty.
Yeah.
And I so resonate with that, especially after a time spent really coming from your heart and building a team because you know that that's what's best for them and their own emotional security
Yeah.
or emotional safety. But at some point, man, you have to be clear-eyed about the fact that you've gone about as far as you can. And
Yeah. Yeah.
just a quick story: I took over I was asked to. I'm sorry. I was going to apply for a particular position at a retirement community here in Asheville, and at the time, the person that was in the position currently wasn't leaving for a while, so I was asked to go in and do an assessment of the culinary operation. So after about a week, I spoke to everybody involved, and it was clear that there was some really, let's say, unproductive behavior going on. So the chef and the food and beverage director, who shared an office space, didn't want the rest of the organization to know if there was any dysfunction in their department. So very often they'd say, okay, we understand the problem, we're going to take care of it, and it would never
Mm.
go any further. As a consequence, none of the staff felt comfortable going to human resources, which is there for a particular function, and none of the problems ever got solved. So these two individuals were kind of codependent with one another, and they ran the department so tight that it was a Chinese fire drill every day. and people were just walking around with their heads bowed. I mean, it was really sad the
Yeah.
way everybody was. And about a week after I put my assessment in, I got a text from the chef saying, haha, I got a new job, and bailed on the entire operation. So I was asked, hey, can you come in and bridge us from chef to chef?
Hmm.
Just to let you know, food and beverage director position is, we found somebody for that. So I'm like, fine. And then about 3 weeks later, they told me that that person had ghosted them, and I ended up doing both jobs. So they said, hey, do you want to stay here and do the job anyway? And I said,
Hmm.
sure, formally. And this organization had grown from, basically 100 residents to 650 residents in the space of about 6 years. So they were operating it as a kind of mom and pop, yet it was large enough, 100 people in the department, that
Yeah.
there had to be certain structures in place, that didn't exist before. So there was no standardized job classifications. There was no standardized pay. Everybody pays was going all over the place.
Hmm.
So for me, the first thing was going in there and just getting everybody around a table and saying, okay, so these are the issues. This is kind of like the line of attack, and this is what we can get done. And it took a long time to get, say, job classifications done because everybody
Right.
wants to have their 2 cents in. But during that process, somehow I lost the faith of my direct report. She started shopping outside the organization for someone to take my position and then not telling me about it. But the point being is that once I lost her confidence, then it was virtually impossible for me to move the operation forward.
Hmm.
Um, One of the most important things that we were able to introduce, and still happens there, is a complete second day orientation. So an orientation period might be something that's easily doable. You don't necessarily need a lot of buy-in from everybody, to make that happen. But from the standpoint of the new hires, they knew exactly where they were going to slot in and what was expected of them and how they could move through the organization. And those three things are really, really important, for people to just kind of like not worry about where they were and what was possible.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, this is a great time for everyone in the industry to really consider what's important to them, what's kind of involatile, like things that they're not going to give up. Like I need transparency, vulnerability, and honesty.
Yeah.
And, remembering that you're not the one that's, yes, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. So maybe stick around and talk to a few people, as the shift ends, and talk to some employees that are still working there. Um, and there are, platforms out there, employment platforms that have reviews of employers. And so these are all kind of part and parcel of the coaching moving forward as people start to figure out where they most want to be, and and looking for the organizations that are going to take them there. So that's the one piece, like being very, very clear about what you stand for and where you're going to go to be able to be in congruence with that. And then finding yourself in a situation where, Jim, like you said, it could always be that it's been just a rough couple years, right?
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily always need to be, mismanagement or poor leadership. It could be the supply chain has been broken. It could have been COVID. It could have been a bunch of different things. And now you're presented with a situation where you've got anywhere from 10 to 30 to 50 to 100 people who are looking to you to bring them all together.
Yeah.
And again, what's step number one?
Yeah. I think we're on the same page that step number one is talk to your people. Step number one is check in. Step number one is, ask people what they need and ask yourself what you need. You made a comment a few minutes ago that I feel like I can't not touch on, and that was
Sure.
I feel guilty if I leave my team,
Yes.
right? We talk about retention being the new cool all the time,
Yep.
but stick around out of guilt, that's not cool. Stick around out of fear, that's not cool. Stick around because it aligns with values. Stick around because you feel protected by your employer. Stick around because you're passionate about the mission. That's the part of retention that's cool, right? I
Yep.
think that we need to. That goes for both employees, making sure that they are aligned with the values and the mission of the organization they work for,
Hmm.
and that goes for the people who run the organization, making sure that they're doing what they can to protect their people so they don't feel guilty staying. I mean, that's not good for
Right.
anybody.
Right. Aaron Fish is just chiming in, good friend, of ours. Transparency and honesty, it seems obvious, but it's not always there. And, yeah, this idea of over communication, I don't think can be understated. And yet, you might have some people in your team who are just like, dude, that's just a bunch of words. Like,
Mhm.
really, where's the action? And unless we're throwing ourselves into the breach of a particular operation, it's very hard for people to, I should say, it's hard to gain their trust and confidence if you're not willing to jump in and do the things that are the most, uncomfortable for you. And, I'm a big fan of mopping. I love a good mop.
I didn't know that about you.
No, I listen.
That's good to know.
It's the the movie with Jim Carrey about meeting God, and he's just a janitor mopping this
Yeah.
perennial floor. There is something to be said about manual labor, especially in times of great change. There may not be a whole lot that you can do operationally to change things, but if you're willing to roll up your elbows and grab a mop or do whatever that looks like, it's um, it's empowering to your staff.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're going through this discovery process about what's important to you. You could also be doing that with your staff, and it may be that that means some of your staff leave, and that's okay. Um, People leaving an organization can be an incredibly positive act and reinvigorate the organization with people who are coming in with a much more enthusiastic attitude. And I liken it to infecting the organism with positivity, right?
Yeah.
You get enough people in there of the same mind, connected to the same thing. And again, this can be done through, really great hiring processes and really in-depth conversations with potential staff members. But it could very well be that you start bringing in staff members that are more aligned to how you view running an operation. And after a while, they start in quote unquote infecting everyone around them.
Yeah. That mopping thing. I mean, I have to go back and comment on that. I can't leave without. I can't let you get away with that one. For
Okay.
one, if I ever have a chance to come to your house, I'm going to expect that you have really clean floors.
Yeah, you got it, man.
But that, to me, that speaks to a certain approach around the whole concept of servant leadership, right? You're
Yeah,
doing something that you don't have to do, that nobody expects you to do, but it's going to make your team's life easier,
right.
right? And sometimes it's the simplest things, the one that, and for anybody who might listen to this that ever worked with me, the thing I always tried to do was, another partner of ours, Doug Newhook, him and I were talking about this yesterday,
Mm-mm-mm.
taking trays full of dirty dishes away from staff and
Oh
just
yeah.
taking them to the dish area so that they can spend time with their customer.
Yep.
I always used to find it so funny, the look that I would get if I took a tray of dirty dishes away from an employee. They would look at me like, what are you doing? What planet are you from? And it wasn't anything really serious that was going to, change their day dramatically, but it just made their life a little bit easier. So that was something I always tried to do. I don't like mopping, so that was never my go-to.
No, but I mean, you bring up an excellent point, and I know that look that you're talking about. All of a sudden they feel that arm get really like they're not expecting that, and the tray disappears in their hand, like what, and kind
Yeah,
of turn around. Um, and I feel it's necessary to kind of hammer this point. None of this stuff costs money, and
right,
none of this costs any time getting it approved by upper management.
right,
And it could be that you start a relationship with a staff member that extends beyond this particular location and employment. It
yeah,
could be that you start, pulling together a cadre of people who really respect you and will follow you to the wall, as they
yeah,
say.
yeah.
And they're waiting for your call 3 months later. Hey, I've landed on my feet. Here we go. And are you ready to make a move?
100%. And the funny thing about it, that I always was, I shouldn't, this might be the wrong word, but I was always entertained mildly by the conversation that generated. And
Yeah.
Aaron Fish is now saying his was jumping in the dish area to help clean that up, or
Yep.
mopping or grabbing the tray. You know, it wasn't about, I can't tell you how many times I had to explain to staff, I'm not doing this because you didn't do it right. I'm doing this because so you don't have to.
Right.
Right. I'm not mopping because the floor's dirty and I'm annoyed that you're not doing it. I'm mopping so you don't have to. I'm trying to help make your day easier. I'm trying to help make your
Right.
job easier. Right.
Right.
It's different. There's a difference there.
Well, and after a staff has been beat down, and thought that everything was an indictment on their work performance, to have somebody come in that just wants to help might be an initial shock. And to be able to have that second, hey, listen, if I'm, busting your tables or whatever, it's not because you can't get to it. It's because I want to make your life
It's so you don't have to.
right. And Doug's just chiming in and saying, nailed it. Bend an extra arm, leg, even brain if you need to, whatever you can do to alleviate their stress, and smile while you're doing it. And to Doug's point, I haven't always been really good about smiling while I'm doing it, because I'm feeling the pressure like they're feeling the pressure, and I might be, drooping down for that second, and making more of a point of buzzing around the dining room, grabbing trays or bussing tables, so that my staff can actually reset those tables, and take care of the guest. And it's not always as intuitive as doing the dirtiest job. Sometimes it's looking and see where the greatest need is.
Absolutely. But it's all about protecting your people.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to again, kind of hammer the nail, benchmark 60 and its productivity metric is one of the best ways to protect staff, especially if they know that you're actually doing it. Because again, there are some things that you're going to be doing as a manager that's not necessarily important to share with your staff.
Mm-hmm.
But if your staff knows that you are actually deploying a technology that will protect their workload, such that the opportunities for them to be overworked become less and less, and not only that, gives us an opportunity to staff the restaurant appropriately, that's going to go a long way into making sure that staff feels comfortable, protected, and they're not going to jump ship for a quarter or 50 cents, because they probably can't find that anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've had lots of interesting discussion with restaurant operators lately about, there's so much conversation happening about work-life balance, right? Great resignation, work from home, all these different things. Most of that conversation is on the life side of the conversation. But that workload thing that you're talking about is focusing on the work part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's kind of a loss if you go on vacation, let's say there's an unlimited vacation policy, which is awesome. But every time you go on vacation, you come back to work and you're stressed the minute you get back.
Right, because everything's just been piled up on your desk.
Right. If we can prevent that through managing workload and looking at things differently that way, it's going to make the employee experience that much better and improve retention.
Yeah,
so that's a discussion for another day.
Another day. And Jemiah's chiming in. Jemiah's focus has always been the lobby and bathrooms, because as a customer, that's my first point of contact. And yes, it doesn't really matter whose name is on the checklist to go in there and to make sure that not only that it's getting done, but that you might actually do something to alleviate someone else's rounds. And I'm really grateful for all our friends and listeners, Aaron Fish, Doug, Jemiah. We actually had a first-time listener, Lathani Sandy Gumby from
Africa,
Cape Town, South Africa. So the message is getting out there, like our listener who wrote into us. Please DM either Jim or I, send us an email. We'd love to know what's going on and how we can provide content that's really going to serve you, because this show is all about solutions. And yet we know that sometimes you can't talk about a solution until you can identify the problem. So thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Benchmark 60's Turning the Table. And just some programming notes. So next week we're going to have Jensen Cummings. We're also going to have Michelle Moreno. And Kelly Featheringham has confirmed her second episode with us for the ABCs. So we're really looking forward to that. So we've got a busy November, December, just like you guys, and we're all in this together. So thank you very much.